I spent 100 days simulating a dinosaur ecosystem. I transformed these barren lands into a thriving ecosystem, full of predators and prey alike. Over the course of 100 days, our ecosystem transformed into one of the most resilient but ruthless ecosystems that life has ever seen. Can life find a way, or is it all doomed to die? Well, for us to find out, we'll have to go back to day 1. Our journey begins on an empty Isla Nublar, the island that Jurassic Park and then Jurassic World was created on. It was the ideal place for our dinosaur ecosystem as we attempted to bring John Hammond's dream to life, just in a slightly different way than he had originally intended. The first dinosaurs I settled on to introduce to the ecosystem were the Coryphosaurus, last seen in the late Cretaceous period between 75 to 77 million years ago. Its name means helmet lizard, and I thought it would be the perfect first addition to our ecosystem. I made sure that our first dinosaur was content in their new biome, so I made sure to add some water and shrubs to the nearby area. Each dinosaur likes and dislikes certain creatures, which should make my job a lot easier, as I made sure to steer clear of any Doctor Wu hybrids or Therizzinosauruses, as it appeared that my first arrival would not be very tolerant of those. Instead, I opted to go for the Brachiosaurus, one of the most iconic and well-known dinosaurs that lived during the late Jurassic period.
It's a dinosaur.
After releasing it into the ecosystem, I saw that it would not be compatible with any more sauropods in its nearby area, so that ruled that one out. As the Brachys accustomed to their new environment, beneath their feet, the latest arrivals made themselves at home. The Dryosaurus was a herbivore, feeding primarily on low-lying vegetation, where its beak-like mouth and teeth were well suited for chewing and processing plant material. After the Dryosaurus, I introduced a small army of Dracorex into the nearby area. Apparently this creature was given its name after Hogwarts, the fictional school for wizards in Harry Potter, which is probably the most bizarre fact that you will hear today. While all the dinosaurs settled into their new surroundings, I made an effort to make sure that they would feel right at home. I added different areas of forest, some ground leaf for the smaller herbivores, and some different bodies of water where they could spread out a bit across the land. Now, if you are a fan of dinosaurs, you are almost certain to be a fan of today's sponsor, which is the brand new PAL-like open world survival game named Maraibo Go. In Maraibo Go, get ready to explore this free-to-play, monster-themed open world with hundreds of monsters to choose from, with all different skills and gameplay elements, offering a huge variety of gameplay. Use spheres to catch your pals and battle alongside them, but don't sleep on the host of powerful weaponry that can be crafted that will help you take down the fiercest of bosses. The monsters on offer here can be used for more than just battling though, as they also help out with the construction and production of your base. Assign different monsters to different tasks based on what they'll be good at, and they will be happy to help you with any farming, gathering or production tasks. But don't forget to look after them, giving them plenty of food, water and rest. A happy monster is a well-behaved monster after all. And if you are a fan of the multiplayer experiences, then Maraibo Go is the game for you. Invite your friends and survive together in the open world, fighting and exploring together as you go. But remember, in this hostile environment, be careful who you trust, as there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. Maraibo Go launches globally on the 10th of October for both mobile and PC, so click the link in the description to pre-register for the game right now so you can jump on launch day without any delays. Thanks to the folks at Maraibo Go for sponsoring this video. They all seem pretty content and happy in their environment, so that night I introduced a deadly poisonous carnivore into the mix. The Compsognathus. Yes, you might remember these dinosaurs for brutally murdering a man in Jurassic Park: The Lost World. Well, despite having a deadly bite, these curious little things are actually incredibly friendly, and unless provoked are happy to socialise with every single dinosaur, so this was a good way for me to add a meat eater into this part of the ecosystem without causing any danger for the existing animals. This area of the ecosystem I would go on to call the Great Valley, but I would soon have to turn my attention elsewhere for a while. On day 5, I began to work on the other side of the island, on another mini ecosystem. This one was purposely placed away from the existing creatures, and I began to incubate some eggs for the Dilophosaurus. Originating from the Jurassic period around 193 million years ago, the Dilophosaurus rose to fame after the original Jurassic Park film, and these were not dinosaurs to be messed with. After releasing them into the wild, I quickly looked to add some meat, both raw meat and also live prey to keep them entertained. I also added a body of water so that they had somewhere to drink, but it wasn't long before they were missing forest. So in a semi-circular fashion, I added in some trees, in the hope that they would then stay in this area as they had everything they needed. These creatures were unlikely to get on well with many others in the ecosystem, so it was important to keep them under close watch. Back in the Great Valley where my herbivore paradise resided, it turned out that one of my Draco Rex had caught himself a common cold due to unmet needs. Before I had much chance to investigate this further though, I was summoned back to the other side of the island, where the Dilophosaurs had begun to fight for dominance. The fight ended with the previous alpha scurrying off with their tail between their legs, and a new king of the Dilophosaurs reigned. While they enjoyed a much-earned snack, I checked out the traits that these Dilophosaurs had, which would apparently make them more hospitable than regular Dilophosaurs. This wasn't something though I was sure about putting to the test just yet. Leaving the Dilophosaurs to themselves, I began work on another part of the island, where another ecosystem would reign. The first dinosaur released into this ecosystem was the Struthiomimus, a relatively large omnivore that fed on a varied diet of plants, insects, small vertebrates, and the eggs. Yes, this is actually Ozzy from Land Before Time, so somewhat of a channel icon around here, meaning that we had to make sure we looked after them. Surrounding the hatchery, I added a lot of forest and some water, and then added some friends from the same family tree. This is the Archie Ornithomimus, and please don't crucify me in the comments if I've said any of these dinosaur names wrong. I figured that basically being these same dinosaurs, these would get on pretty well with Ozzy and co, so I added a ton of ground leaf to keep them fed and looked after, before leaving them to it and turning my attention to one of the most famous dinosaurs known to man, the Triceratops. Before creating any Triceratops eggs though, I would have a little bit of a play around with its genes, as Triceratopses can sometimes be a little bit aggressive, and I did not want them taking out any of their anger on any of our innocent ecosystem creatures. However, all this attention on my individual stations had left me neglecting my first mini ecosystem that I had created, and in the Great Valley a lot of my creatures were incredibly unhappy, with my Draco Rex in particular actually starving to death due to a lack of ground nuts, so I of course made an effort to get some in for them. I then found out that my Dryosauruses were unhappy due to a lack of ground fibre. I'm dying! And realised the complex nature of the ecosystem, and having to make sure that every creature had enough various resources to cater for all. My compies were also unhappy due to a lack of sand, so while it did look a little bit odd and out of place in the grassy land surrounding it, I did add a small patch of sand to hopefully keep them happy. And the trouble didn't end there, as heading back to my Archie Ornithomimuses, they were lacking in ground fibre also, so I made sure to add some in to hopefully keep them happy and disease free. It was now time to release the Triceratops, and I let the dinosaur that used to go head to head with the T-Rex 66 million years ago get settled into its new environment. Meanwhile, I had a quick check-in with the Dilophosauruses, and saw on first look one of them having a nap with the local wildlife. Only on further inspection I became less and less convinced that this goat was still alive. While over here with the Dilophosaurs, I decided to try my hand at introducing a new creature to their habitat in the hope of a friend for them. According to their profile, it said that they like scavengers, so I began to mess with the genes of the Colophysis, another scavenger like the Compy, and I was pretty sure that this would get on well with the Dilos. So I released my new friends and left them and the Dilos to become acquainted together, as I had to shoot off as my new Triceratopses were already fighting. This was just another simple battle for Alpha of the pack, and while interesting to watch, I knew that they were unlikely to seriously harm each other. But back on the other side of the park, we had a serious issue. The Dilophosaurs had not taken well to their new residents, and was, murdering them. I watched in shock horror as I realised the critical error that I had made, in condemning all these poor innocent souls to death. I double checked all the profiles as I watched the Dilos one by one murder all the Coles, and I was still confused as to why exactly they weren't getting on. But that, my dear friends, is nature at its finest. Sometimes it cannot be contained, and the Dilophosaurs taught me a valuable lesson that day. Rising from the ashes though, I began to create myself a brand new mini ecosystem between the Dilophosaur one and the Struthiomimus one. This was going to house the biggest and most dangerous carnivores we had seen yet in this giant ecosystem, so I prepared a nice big zone for them, in the hopes they wouldn't go wandering too far away and accidentally stumble across a nice snack. The first dinosaur we released was a pack of Carnotauruses, and I think this theropod dinosaur needs no introduction to you. As we hit day 20, a storm hit, which agitated all the new dinosaurs including the Carnotauruses, but thankfully with the ecosystem separate for now, no issues arose. The next morning though, on day 21, I discovered something very worrying over at the Dilophosaurs. While not a single Colophysis remained with the Dilos as they had all been taken out, it appeared that some of the Dilophosaurs had suffered major injuries in the aftermath of their fights, with one suffering from internal bleeding. I could only wait it out and see if they would recover from this. Back with the Carnotauruses, another apex creature was about to be released. The Albertosaurus, which was a close relative of the T-Rex and lived approximately 70 to 73 million years ago. Now, you might think introducing it alongside the Carnotaurus was a bad idea and an accident waiting to happen. But no, apparently these two dinos actually get along brilliantly, so we're perfectly content to share their territory together. Alongside these two, I actually released another patch of Colophysis into this ecosystem, as I felt guilty about the massacre that I committed to the last lot. As you can both see, the Albertosaurus and Carnotaurus were getting along swimmingly, as they both enjoyed a nice drink together, and I then added some rocks into their sandy habitat to make them feel right at home. Back in our brand new herbivore section of the ecosystem, I prepared to open the gates to our latest arrival, the Apatosaurus, or depending when you were born, some of you may have called this dinosaur the Brontosaurus. This sauropod lived in the late Jurassic and weighed anywhere from 16 to 22 tons. I added plenty of forest for our new arrivals and some water so they would feel right at home, but was then forced away by the shocking news that one of the Dilophosaurs had passed away from an infected wound formed in the aftermath of its fight with a Colophysis. At first, I thought the dead Dilophosaurus' sibling was coming to mourn its passing, but my feelings of sadness immediately diminished once I realised that it was actually eating the corpse of its dead sibling. The bad news didn't stop there though, as I actually watched another Dilophosaur pass away in the grass nearby, meaning that we had now lost two back to back. Back over with the Apatosauruses, I actually decided to release some Troodons. The Troodons were unlikely to attack the Apatosauruses due to their sheer size difference, so the hope was that these would be able to live in harmony together. However, things would not be so easy for the Troodon, as it would have to compete for territory with the Proceratosaurus, which was another similar sized carnivore. Time would tell if these two would be able to tolerate each other in the smaller space, or if one would come out victorious. After consulting my live map, I began to see the first signs of a potential future ecosystems colliding, as this brave Carnotaurus had ventured outside of its territory and was getting dangerously close to the nearby herbivore paradise. Less than a day after releasing them into the ecosystem, the Troodon and Proceratosaurus were fighting for territory. While these fights didn't normally lead straight away to death, it would leave lasting scars on both of them, with this Troodon suffering surface wounds and the Proceratosaurus being poisoned by the Troodons. This was clearly going to be a bad match and would likely end with one species being victorious and claiming this part of the ecosystem as their own. Up in the northeast herbivore ecosystem I was putting together, I released this Sauropelta. You might think this dinosaur is a member of the Ankylosaurid family, but it's actually not, and it's instead a member of the Nodosauridae family. It wasn't just carnivores I had to worry about separating, as these two families were never going to tolerate the other being in their territory, meaning I'd have to make sure I kept any future Ankylosaurids away from this area of the ecosystem. Nearby was where our Carnotaurus and Albertosaurus pack roamed, and upon checking in on them, I made a chilling discovery. It looked as if the two ecosystems were about to collide. The Struthiomimus and Archaeomorphomimuses had expanded their territory and were edging closer to the deadly carnivores. A bloodbath could only be contained for so long, especially as this Archaeomorphomimus decided to come and check out what this Carnotaurus was having for dinner. Not the smartest move. While I waited for carnage to happen up on that area of the island, I released the next species of dinos into my ecosystem, which was the Parasaurolophus, or the Parasaur as some of you may know it as. This duck-billed dinosaur was going to slot in nicely and easily into our ecosystem with everything it needed to survive already around, although it may have to deal with the nearby Carnotaurus and Albertosaurus squad. On day 30, it was time to begin work in the southern regions of the island, where a brand new ecosystem was forming, headed up by the Baryonyx. This fish-eating dinosaur from the early Cretaceous period was a big fan of water with a rocky theme, so I set about making sure that everything was there to make it feel comfortable in its new environment. And there was one dino in particular that would do really well with the Baryonyx, which was its bigger brother, the Suchomimus. The name Suchomimus means crocodile mimic in Greek, referring to its long, narrow, crocodile-like snout and teeth, which resemble those of a crocodile. A close relative of the Baryonyx and also the Spinosaurus, it was also primarily a fish eater, and I was confident that neither of these dinosaurs would wander too far away from their ecosystem in search of prey. The ecosystem was thriving, but the cracks were just beginning to show. At least the Baryonyxes were settling in well and working out who was the alpha of the group. They seemed pretty happy in their new environment, but while the Baryonyxes liked a rocky texture, the Suchomimuses preferred sand, so I attempted to satisfy both of them as much as I could. The Proceratosauruses and Troodons were still fighting it out for territory control, with deaths appearing on both sides. On day 34, I found myself an Archaeomorphomimus that had strayed out into an empty grasslands and had found itself starving. Likely fleeing from the Carnotaurus pack that had killed its brother, I had no choice but to expand the ecosystem to save this poor soul. While it may save the life of one dinosaur, it would no doubt attract both predator and prey in the coming days. I then had a pack of Deinonychus delivered into the ecosystem by transport, as releasing them nearby would have been far too risky, with likely clashes of territory with other carnivores. I had built them in a lush home where they would hopefully be content with, full of trees, water and prey. Their living partner was an unlikely choice, but a necessary one. The Dreadnoughtus is one of the largest and most complete titanosaurs ever discovered, and when its name directly translates to fear nothing, I was confident that the Deinonychus family would be sensible enough to stick to the goats provided for them. Talking of unlikely living partners, I decided that pairing the hostile Dilophosaurs with a Camarasaurus would actually be another good pairing, as sauropods don't tend to mix too well with other sauropods, and once again the Dilophosaurs would be daft to try and attack them due to this sheer size difference. I had to make sure that the Camarasauruses had enough tall nut trees to feed on, so I did have to slightly alter the environment that they were in, but they seemed pretty happy there, and unlike their last partners I tried to get the Dilophosaurs to mix with, they seemed completely unbothered by them. Checking in on our Suchomimus and Baryonyx exhibit, I was struggling with the placement of one creature. I had assumed that all the fish-eating dinosaurs would also enjoy the company of a Spinosaurus, but it appeared that this was not the case, so that problem would be reserved for another day. Checking in on our Deinonychus pack, they seemed to be enjoying their new environment very much, and I even caught them all out for a family McDonald's together. A Struthiomimus had once again wandered too far out of its comfort zone, and I found it stranded and abandoned, poisoned and starving to death. So I once more extended the ecosystem to save its life, knowing that the future consequences this may have. At least for now though, the nearby Carnotauruses were too busy fighting for alpha position in their pack, and weren't focusing too much on the nearby prey. Combining two carnivores that would get on and tolerate each other was always going to be a task, but the Metriocamphosaurus was one of the exceptions to this, due to its ability to get on with the Allosaurus. The Metrios were released first, and I began to craft their habitat, only to get dragged away to witness a Carnotaurus brutally murder another Struthiomimus. Back at the Metrios, I continued to craft their perfect habitat, and it wasn't long before they were completely content with their surroundings, and it was now time to unleash a pack of 3 Allosaurus. The next morning, they immediately set about working out their pack order and who was going to be the boss around there. With the 2 carnivores settling into their ecosystem, I ended up making a huge mistake and accidentally releasing some live prey right into their laps. These Kentrosauruses were meant to be transported to the Great Valley, but I accidentally ended up releasing them right into the danger zone, surrounded by Metriocanthos and Allosauruses. I didn't particularly know what to do at this point, apart from plant vegetation just outside of the carnivore area, in the hopes they would roam so far away from the danger zone in search of food. While they could hold their own somewhat against the Metrios, the same could not be said with the Allos, and when a dead Kentro was found, I knew that I had blood on my hands, as I had not given these animals a chance. We had now hit day 40 and were nearing the halfway point of this ecosystem's life, and we celebrated this milestone by watching one of our Carnotaurus brutally take down an Archaeornithomimus. These Carnos were truly becoming the villains of the ecosystem so far, although they would certainly not keep that title. In better news, it appeared that my master plan to get the Kentros to expand their territory and leave the hostile pit of carnivores I'd released them into was actually working. I then released 2 more new creatures into the Great Valley section of the ecosystem. First up was the Chasmosaurus, found in the late Cretaceous period, and was a medium-sized ceratopsin dinosaur. These were quickly followed out the gate by the Ankylosaurus, who was an absolute monster of a dinosaur, especially when compared to most other herbivores in the ecosystem, and with that weapon of a club on its tail, it was not one to be messed with by many predators at all. On the subject of predators, it was time to bite the bullet and start preparing to introduce the Indoraptor to the ecosystem. This hybrid dinosaur that was the star of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom was not one to be messed with. It disliked literally everything and would kill on sight if given the opportunity. It was clear that this dinosaur was going to have some sort of special isolated part of the ecosystem where it would hopefully remain, so I started to build up a biome for it and then had it delivered by transport. I watched it be delivered in and admired it as it gathered its surroundings. A truly terrifying creature that could not be allowed to roam freely. So when I saw it was missing some rock, I made sure to add some in as soon as possible, so he didn't go wandering off looking for some. The Iguanodon was the next creature to be released, and it was a bit less of a danger than the Indoraptor. Still though, this is an iconic dinosaur, as it was one of the first dinosaurs to be discovered way back in 1822, and coming in at 3 to 5 tons, it would be no pushover for any carnivores after an easy snack. One such carnivore though that would fancy his chances against the Iguanodon was our next addition. I began to create its own biome in the centre of the ecosystem, where I added plenty of trees, some water, and of course some prey. It was then just time to wait for our next arrivals, and as they touched down, we welcomed a pair of Tyrannosaurus rexes to our ecosystem. Its name means Tyrant Lizard King, and it is one of the most studied dinosaurs of all time. With a bite force estimated to be between 8,000 to 12,800 pounds per square inch, it is believed to have had the strongest bite force of any known terrestrial animal. While the pair of T-Rexes got themselves settled in, not too far away from them, their arch-nemesis the Triceratops was face to face with a wandering Carnotaurus, who had gone on quite an adventure from where it had first been released. No kill was made on this occasion, but it was clear that the Carnotaurus had come out the winner, for now at least. On day 50, and with the recent addition of the Indoraptor and the Tyrannosaurus, I decided to fully send it with the carnivores. So after a little bit of gene splicing to make sure the Velociraptors were a bit more accommodating than usual, I released a pack of 4 of them into the ecosystem by helicopter. They had a large area to roam and plenty of prey, but with the Tyrannosaurs located not too far away, I was hoping that they would stay out of each other's way. Of course, there was one creature that cohabited well with the raptors, and just past the halfway point in the creation of our ecosystem, we introduced the apex predator, the Indominus Rex. With a lot of creatures in the ecosystem now, I was constantly scanning the map to see where everyone was located and see which ecosystems were about to collide. Unfortunately, as I just remarked about the Kentros making it out of the danger zone earlier, I found a dead one next to a rather guilty looking Allosaurus, who appeared to have come away from the fight with a damaged tooth, likely due to the spines from the Kentro. Between the days of 50 and 60, I really focused on releasing the final creatures into the ecosystem, before I would let things play out, letting nature do its course. One of these creatures introduced was the Diplodocus, one of the best known sauropod dinos living in the Jurassic period from 154 to 152 million years ago. But it was now time to find a solution for a problem that I had not anticipated. I had assumed that the Spinosaurus, being a fellow fish eater and a fellow family member, would fit in well with its smaller cousins the Baryonyx and the Suchomimus, but apparently this was not the case. Thus, I had to build an entirely new ecosystem, surrounded by water and fish, in the hopes that the Spinosaurus would behave itself. As I watched it get delivered and slowly lowered down into its new habitat, I felt this dinosaur was going to be trouble, one way or the other. However, I wasn't able to stay at the Spinosaurus welcome gathering long, because over in the Indominus playground, she was already causing trouble. A poor Baryonyx had accidentally roamed into the territory of the Indominus, who had dispatched of the poor thing in seconds. It was the alpha predator around here for a reason. Now, I was starting to run out of room for these giant carnivorous dinos, and thus had to introduce the Carcharodontosaurus, one of the largest theropod dinosaurs to walk the earth, up in the northern section of the park, alongside the Dilophosaurs and the Camarasaurs. While this might sound like a disaster, okay, yes, it did appear to be a disaster waiting to happen. So what do you do when you already have 5 apex carnivores roaming the same ecosystem? You release another one. The Giganotosaurus, which is one of the largest terrestrial carnivores to ever walk the planet, was our next addition. The problem was now that all roughly in the same vicinity, we had the T-Rexes, Indominus Rex, the Velociraptors, a pair of Giganotosaurus, and the Spinosaurus. It was unlikely that all of these creatures would be able to live in harmony. One of the final creatures to be released into the ecosystem was the Amargasaurus. I released this into the area where the Carnotaurus and Albertosaurus packs had previously dominated. However, these creatures had begun to expand their territory long ago, so I hoped that the Amargasaurus would be able to fit in okay and keep itself away from danger. To help with this, I added some sand and water into the corner of the ecosystem, where the Carnotaurus and Albertosaurus squad seemed to have gathered. I then checked on the map and made some big discoveries. Firstly, the Indominus Rex had begun to adventure outside of its original territory, and rather terrifyingly, seemed to be heading in the direction of the Spinosaurus. But my more immediate concern was the Tyrannosaurus Rex and Giganotosaurus fight that was about to explode, as I saw them heading towards each other. Oh, hang on, no, they were just having a nap together. This was not something that I had expected, but did give me hope that I was actually creating a thriving ecosystem here, where death wasn't inevitable. Unfortunately though, the naughty Dilophosaurs were not quite getting the memo, and instead went after this Edmontosaurus. I was, however, surprised to see that the Edmontosaur was taking no prisoners, and despite the Dilophosaur's best efforts, this was not a fight that ended well for them, with one being booted to its death and the other one running away as fast as its little legs would take it. And the day was about to get from bad from worse for the Dilophosaur pack, as this one had made the massive mistake of wandering into Indoraptor territory in search of food. Unfortunately though, our resident Indoraptor was not feeling like sharing its food that day, and instead murdered the Dilophosaur in record time. It was likely that the arrival of the 2 Carcharodontosauruses had caused the Dilophosaurs to move territory, and in search of new food, they had made desperate moves. Unfortunately, my big hopes for the Amargasaurus duo appeared to have not gone well, as the Carnotauruses struck once again. I didn't have much time though to mourn the latest loss, as tremors were heard around the ecosystem, as the Spinosaurus and Indominus Rex were facing off. The Indominus was clearly doing more damage than the Spino, and appeared to be landing attacks far more frequently also. After landing a massive blow and getting the Spino's health down to only 36%, sensibly the Spinosaur decided to bow out of the fight and run away. However, with some serious injuries suffered, time would tell whether the Spinosaur would recover from the encounter. On day 75, we were 3/4 of the way through our ecosystem journey, and we had now entered the survival of the fittest stage. At this stage, only the strongest would remain, and another hungry Dilophosaur had found himself face to face with the Indoraptor, while another one actually took a nap in the background. I was pretty sure that these Dilophosaurs had a death wish, but to my amazement, I think the Indoraptor actually backed down from this fight, and both parties left without a blow being dealt. Perhaps this was a start of a new emerging friendship. The last proper apex predator to be released into the ecosystem at this late stage was the Acrocanthosaurus. This apex predator was put in to disrupt the Carnotaurus and Albertosaurus monopoly, which had completely taken over this corner of the ecosystem. I decided that a new alpha predator might give them something to think about. Although I was swiftly reminded who the actual alpha predator of this ecosystem is, when the Indominus Rex took down the Suchomimus in record time, and then performed its ultimate disrespect trick of taking a nap on top of its dead prey. Checking in on the Spinosaurus, it was not going well. The Spino's health had seriously declined since we had last seen it, and it was now down to 19% due to its wounds from the fight. However, just as I was accepting the dark reality of what was to come, the wounds healed, and the Spinosaurus could now focus on getting its strength back. It had a long road ahead, but there was now light at the end of the tunnel once more. Unfortunately, there was no light left for the Suchomimus, as the Indom took out the second in quick succession, only moments after killing their sibling right in front of them. It was clear at this point that we now had a new villain of the ecosystem, as the Indominus Rex took that title away from the Carnotaurus family. It appeared that the Dilophosaur who had scared off the Indoraptor earlier had not been so lucky this time around. I was immediately then alerted to the extinction of yet another dinosaur family in this ecosystem, as shock horror, the Indominus Rex took down the final Suchomimus remaining. I think it was pretty clear at this point that these hybrid dinosaurs were not to be messed with. The Ceratosaurus would be the very last carnivore introduced on day 80, and this was a risk. I'd meddled with the genome as much as possible to try and make it more hospitable to other dinos, and while it was friendly with the nearby Allosaurus, the Metriacanthosaurus pack were not its favourite dinos. While I went in to see if these two species could get along, I watched our brand new Acrocanthosaurus, who was apparently starving, take on an Iguanodon, and take it down with relative ease. It wasn't long though until I saw what absolute bullies these Ceratosauruses were. They were all over the Metriocanthos, and it wasn't long until I found a dead one who had apparently died of unknown causes, which I wasn't entirely convinced by. It was all kicking off in the ecosystem now, as the Indominus Rex and Spinosaurus faced off against each other once more. By the time I made it over there though, the Spinosaurus had already sustained a significant injury, and things were not looking good for it. Sure enough, the Indominus would come out victorious, and there would be no escape for the Spinosaurus this time. While one apex carnivore was down, the Tyrannosaurs were at least being well behaved, and upon checking in on them, I caught them snoozing in the very same habitat that I'd originally built, just for them, and just being 100% content with life. So the lesson for everyone here is clearly get a pet T-Rex, as they are very well behaved pets. However, do not get a pet Indominus, as this thing was just on an absolute killing spree right now, targeting our Edmontosaurus, which did not stand a chance against a creature of such power. The Metriocanthosaurs were also having a similar issue, and were struggling to find their place in a territory which was now being dominated by the latest editions of the Ceratosauruses. While this one may have got away with its life, it sustained a major fracture, an injury it may struggle to recover from. This Carnotaurus certainly was not recovering, as I found it dead after being killed in a fight with the Acrocanthosaurus, which was technically what this creature was introduced for, although we could do with it putting a stop to our latest villain, the Indominus now. But down in the Great Valley, the residents there had a serious problem. A wandering Allosaurus had infiltrated the ecosystem and was setting about making sure the local residents knew about it. Its behaviour would not have been out of place with the Indominus, as it took down 2 Chasmosauruses in a matter of minutes. With less dinosaurs around now, I decided it was time to start giving nicknames to some of our remaining creatures, and this Allosaurus was going to be called Dennis, because this thing was a menace. And it didn't take too long for Dennis to live up to his new name, as he found the herd of Dracorex, which did not stand a chance. Our dear Metriocanthosaurus, who was attempting to recover from the major fracture, was given the name of Bob, and for some reason I felt very attached to Bob. I was hopeful that, like the Spinosaurus, Bob may yet make a speedy recovery. So while I prayed for Bob's recovery, I observed the Ceratosauruses expanding their territory, as apparently taking over the Metriacanthosaurus territory was not going to be enough for these monsters. As I watched them enjoying their victory, I started to feel very bitter about the way they had come in and ruined my ecosystem, and I plotted a way to get revenge. While I would have loved to have set the Indoraptor on them, unfortunately for me, the Indoraptor was far more interested in his daily nap. I was enjoying observing this nap until I was dragged over to the other side of the ecosystem to see an Albertosaurus rather brutally taking down a Nigersaurus, while its sibling fled for their life. On day 90, I caught the Indominus Rex having a sleep on top of his latest trophy and looking very at peace with the world, while the Tyrannosaurs continued to stick to their ecosystem territory. I actually realised that they were yet to make a single kill, and according to their bio, they were labelled as harmless. Meanwhile, the Indominus had made another kill in the short space of time that was with the Rex, and its fighting record was much more impressive. So I had to think of a name of it, and I settled on Darwin, not after Liverpool striker, but after Charles Darwin, as I felt that our Darwin here would be a big subscriber to the survival of the fittest theory. And it was not long before I caught Darwin in action as he hunted down the Parasaur, who was killed in a singular bite, and added to Darwin's kill list. Just as I thought I had got rid of the Ceratosaur army into the new territory, this one came back to finish Bob off while he was just minding his business, making a recovery from his injury. This infuriated me, as Bob had just been doing his own thing and getting his strength back, and he would be a sorely missed presence in our ecosystem. So I named this Ceratosaurus Demon, because that is exactly what he is, for coming up with a master plan. I was going to create the strongest, most aggressive Spinosaur possible by messing with its genomes and then unleashing its fury on the Ceratosaurs. After messing up with its genes as much as possible, I unleashed the full force of what I would call the Rampinator, the name I'd given to the specifically engineered Spinosaurus. This Spino had one goal in mind, which was to take out the Cerato army, and it was not long before it went face to face with the first one. I grabbed my popcorn and prepared to welcome the next apex predator of the ecosystem, one that could perhaps even give Darwin a run for his money. While I didn't witness a kill on this occasion as the Cerato fled, I knew that one was going to be just around the corner. On day 95, we entered the final 5 days of our ecosystem journey. I found a dead Albertosaurus who had been killed in a fight with a Stegosaurus, and I found it quite refreshing to see a herbivore put up a good fight for once. While I'm sure this pair of Triceratops also tried the same against Darwin, Darwin was just simply too strong for them. The Rampinator was soon back facing off against the Ceratosaurs, and then it happened. The Rampinator claimed victory, and 1 out of 4 Ceratosaurs were down. 3 more to go for my sweet prince. I then encountered a slightly weird situation where an Albertosaurus and Cryolophosaurus were circling each other for a rather long time. Eventually though, neither of them decided to make the first move, and they both ran off in opposite directions. They did end up meeting up for lunch later that day at the food feeder. While I should have been all in favour of this new friendship, I just wanted to see a fight at this point, so I decided to name them Bottle Job 1 and Bottle Job 2. In the most inevitable thing to happen since the failure of Jurassic World, I caught Darwin wiping out the remaining Triceratops and successfully removing another species from the ecosystem. Talking of removing species, I settled back in to watch round 2 of the Rampinator vs Ceratosaur fight, and all was going well. The Ceratosaur was down to 11% health, and one more hit would finish it off. And then it happened. A rogue hit from the Ceratosaur gave the Spinosaur a broken claw, which left untreated was likely to grow into an ingrown claw, a potentially life-threatening injury. This was devastating. So to cheer myself up, I watched Bottle Job 1 and Bottle Job 2 finally have it out with each other. To my amazement, the smallo Cryolophosaur would actually come out on top on this one, and the Albertosaur ran in the opposite direction. I then found this dead Camarasaur, which had died from an infected wound, which was likely caused by the pair of Carcharodontosaurus that roamed in the nearby area. In the battle of the villains, there was only one winner, as Darwin absolutely monstered the alpha of the Carnotaurus pack and performed his standard Big Chad move of having a nap on its dead body. What a guy. The Rampinator's injury had indeed progressed to an ingrown claw by now, and by the time I checked in on him, he was already under half health and back in a fight with another Ceratosaur. A fight that he would win 99 times out of 100 if fit and healthy was lost by the Rampinator, and he was no more. We now had our true cast of villains, from Kingslayer and Demon the Ceratosaurus, to Dennis the Allosaur, who of course was still causing mischief in the Great Valley, and of course the main villain himself, Darwin, who took out the last remaining Amargasaur. But suddenly it appeared that the challenger had appeared for Darwin, or rather 2 challengers had appeared. The pair of Giganotosauruses, named Kevin and Sally, had both come for a snack at the local feeder, at the same time as Darwin, and Darwin clearly and sensibly decided that taking 2 on at the same time was a bad idea. Well done, Darwin. Oh wait, never mind. Apparently that didn't faze Darwin, and he was soon squaring up to Sally. While Sally was suffering a beating at the hands of Darwin, Kevin was apparently having some zoomies in the background and being incredibly unhelpful. Sally somehow managed to get out of the fight uninjured, but Kevin, being the foolish guy he is, decided that he was going to stick around and continue to eat from Darwin's feeder. Darwin, not a fan of this, came after Kevin, and despite getting the first hit in, it wasn't long before Kevin was retreating at extremely low health. I thought for a moment that both Kevin and Sally were going to get out of fights with Darwin alive, but that night, on day 99 nonetheless, Darwin hunted down Kevin in his sleep and took him out. Sally was now alone and left sharing her territory with the Rexes, Raptors, and Darwin. So the next morning, as we hit day 100, she decided to try her luck at the Rex territory, where both Rexes remained. I watched nervously as I watched them eat from the same feeder, wondering who would make it out alive from this one, until something incredible happened. The Rexes accepted Sally into their pack, perhaps joining forces with the common goal of taking out a sleeping Darwin nearby. And that is the end of our ecosystem journey. I hope you all enjoyed this style of video, and if you did, please do let me know by leaving a like on the video, and comment down below what you would like to see me do next. I hope you all have a fantastic day, stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.